You're listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren. I'm the Assistant Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me today, I have special guests, Dr. Wes Olson and Randi Workman, who are the Superintendent and Board President, respectively, of Bond County School District 2. Today, we're going to be discussing their district's decision to close a learning center in favor of providing a more equitable learning environment for their students. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Isaac.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. How did you first notice the sign of declining enrollment, and what did that mean to you?
Well, in 2017, first of all, I should start by saying every single year we do an enrollment analysis. So it's not something that just started ever since Dr. Olson has been with us, and probably even before that, we've done those analysis studies every single year to look at how our district is doing. But in 2017, we really started to look at class size inequity. One of our attendance centers had class sizes averaging 27 students. Another one had the average of 10. And so obviously, I'm going to let Dr. Olson speak to that, of what that means to students when you have that kind of difference in your class sizes.
Yeah. The other component of that is when we talk about funding, and financially, back in 2017, we were coming off pretty lean financial times. And thankfully in that year, the state legislature voted to incorporate a new funding formula, which was a huge impact on our district and really helped our district along with other districts throughout the state. We were a tier 1 school, and looking comparatively at how other districts were funding on a per pupil basis, there's great disparity there, right? And so we started to take that analysis a little further in terms of what does that look like within our district and our school. And then that's a component of the reporting that we do each year now, is the per pupil expenditure. And so when that became part of the school report card, it started to shed light on some of the things that we saw in our district. But just from a pure enrollment analysis, we were looking at I think around a 16% decrease over at a 10-year look back. So we knew that our enrollment was declining, but when we broke that down on the individual attendance center level, we had a few that were 38% decrease in enrollments. And this is a national trend, right? We know this. This isn't anything that's unique to our district per se. It's happening throughout Illinois, particularly in rural districts. And so, we were having conversations around all those things: financing, per pupil expenditure, class size, and it got to the point where it was the disparity was pretty great when you're talking 27 to 10 from a learning perspective, particularly, and that was in kindergarten, right? So we're coming off the lean years where we went from 5 sections of kindergarten in one elementary building. We have one elementary building that has a lot more students, going to 4 because of budget issues, and looking at our other smaller elementaries having these really small class sizes. From a learning perspective, that's a really big difference. If you're a kindergarten student in a class with 26 other kids compared to 9 other students, that's tough to balance that, and it's tough to defend that, frankly. From a place of being a unit school district, but with 3 different communities. That really started the conversation about how can we do better here for these kids, so that particularly our younger learners have a smaller teacher to student ratio.
I think it's also important to note that there was inequity for our staff as well. When you're teaching 27 students, it is very different than teaching 10 students. And so uniquely, I was the only board member at that time that had any experience. I started my career teaching in a kindergarten classroom. I was well aware of what the difference looks like between 27 students and 10 students, and how hard it would be to meet the needs of 27 versus 10.
Okay, so you've kind of hinted at this already with the first signs that some action might be needed to address the declining enrollment numbers. So in 2017, was that the same year that the decision was made to close the Learning Center, or did that come a bit afterwards?
No, it was not actually. So it was kind of a progressive approach. We simply started with the data, started having conversations around the data. And at that time, kind of another historical perspective in our district, we were coming off No Child Left Behind, which at that point in time, there was basically open enrollment. Like, I'm kind of dating myself here, but that's, the old George Bush basically rating each school. And if you had schools that scored differently within your district, you had to send out this letter that said, hey, you can go, your child can go to a different school. So essentially, we didn't really have boundaries for our elementary attendance centers. It was more just open enrollment. And obviously, 2017, we were still not having any conversations around boundaries and what this looks like. So drawing boundary lines for elementary attendance was really kind of the first step. And we started with several options, and we kind of threw it all out there, and it kind of progressed from that. We in 2017, we actually voted to do nothing. I believe so. The board voted to.
We did, just to leave things the way they were, leave open enrollment. I think we did. I guess you would say advertise open enrollment a little more. If you're seeking a smaller class size, if you think you'd like your student to be in a smaller class, we have this option. You could go to school here, so that. Obviously, you want to avoid forcing families into different schools. So we thought, we'll be open about the fact that they can do this. I don't think that everyone understood that they could do that. And so we really wanted to make that known. And that was kind of the first step, to be more open and, like I said, kind of advertise the fact that your students can attend any center.
And at a district level, we provided transportation. So we did have a number of families who, from the larger elementary, said, absolutely, we want to send our kid out to the smaller schools. And so we provided transportation. But it was overall pretty minimal. Like, there wasn't a great amount of movement there. So then we went from that to we discussed publicly, and we did this, at board meetings with as much transparency and data as we could allow, right? Knowing that there's going to be strong reactions either way, even amongst board members. I mean, you had board members from various communities who, saw things differently. They have their own lens, and they are committed to and supportive of a certain attendance center. And so you had that kind of dynamic where people were throwing out ideas. Well, why don't we do this? Well, why don't we do that? And so we tried to listen, right? And say, okay, well, let's see what that would look like. Let's do some analysis on that. Let's run that and see what might happen there. After all that, like Ms. Workman said, we just stuck with open enrollment. And we did that for a couple years. It didn't really solve the problem. We went back and started still having conversations around the potential of combining class sizes, combining grade levels. So combining different grade levels, that created some labor issues and discussions that we had as well. So there was pushback on that. That never transpired, but it was something that was discussed at one point in time. Like, hey, you have 6 fifth graders over here and 7 fourth graders over here. Let's just combine it and do like an old school, one room classroom, which I've seen in really small districts. Sometimes that happens. We didn't go that way. So the issue just kind of like settled for a while, and then COVID happened. Right. And
everything stopped.
And then everything stopped. Right. So, I mean, obviously we were tackling much bigger issues around student learning than just class size. I mean, we were dealing with public health issues and, all those kind of wild decisions that school boards were faced with at that time, which I don't think any school board member goes into that position thinking, I'm going to make decisions around public health that are this significant. But so COVID kind of just quieted things, kind of put it on the back burner, for lack of a better term. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Bigger problems to deal with. And the equity issue, I mean, we were hybrid. We had half of our students in school on an AB schedule. And so you weren't even really having those conversations anymore. We had our hands full just trying to provide some sort of normalcy for our kids and deal with, obviously, public backlash of COVID and public education. Everybody knows about that. So
the narrative kind of turns towards support of the smaller schools because of social distancing and their ability to do that, because there were fewer kids in class. And so it's not a big deal for 10 students to space out 6 feet apart and those types of things. It kind of lent itself towards the fact that, well, it's good that we have small class sizes in these areas, but still it didn't make the issue go away. It just changed the lens of it, I think.
I agree.
So once the dust settled from the fallout of the pandemic, I imagine it would be pretty hard to go back to the community you've been working with so closely for, so many years to address this inequity and ensuring that everyone has an equal chance. So when was it announced that the Learning Center would be closing to the community?
We took those, and I think we took it up back it was December. So we had been in school, but what it really did, at least from my perspective, was that it shined light on, once you're going back to normal, it shined light on the impact that COVID had that spring where kids weren't in school. I mean, you had students coming back, and I hate using the term, it's not clinical, but learning loss. It became very popular to talk about learning loss, right? After COVID. And the reality is that was real. So you had students who were struggling that was compounded. And so our sense of urgency from a district administrative perspective and from our principal's perspective was that we got to do something to help these kids because they're not reading. They're out of school. And we're talking, our folks became early elementary. So our kindergarten, first, second graders. And when we were in COVID, and I applaud the board for this, I mean, that was the focus as well, as how do we get our youngest students back into school as quickly as possible? Because those are, not that high school students or junior high students or upper elementary students aren't important, but quite frankly, if kids, here's what the data says, that if kids don't learn to read in those first 3 years, like fourth grade's the cutoff. If you're a struggling reader by fourth grade, you're going to struggle the rest of your career. Kindergarten, first, third grade, you can provide interventions. You can get kids back on track, so to speak, or at least get them to be readers, right? And so that became our focus. Our total focus was like, hey, we have got to have a sense of urgency about getting these kids who have been severely impacted by school closing to read. And so it brought back this conversation of, if you have a kindergarten class with 27 students and a kindergarten class with 10 students, how difficult is it to teach those kids to read? That's a very different playing field. That's not a level playing field. That's not equitable for kids. And so it brought the conversation right back to the forefront.
I would say COVID also contributed to declining enrollment. I mean, we have students that didn't come back and still haven't come back from COVID. They decided to homeschool, or they were high school students who went with an online program, and they just didn't come back. And so enrollment became a problem again to look at that. And we did start combining across our 2 smaller attendance centers. I think we combined fourth grade.
I think we started because in the 2 outlying centers that are the smallest ones, we started with them in second grade. Okay. Because they had single digit classrooms at that point. And that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm glad we didn't move over that, because that's a huge point.
It was another approach.
COVID also increased the exit of private school, or folks that were just saying, hey, we have health concerns. We don't want our kids to go to school. We're going to homeschool them or whatever. So it increased the decline in enrollment. So again, that created the sense of urgency as well. But what we did at that point was we took, and I believe it was the second grade, and we did this for a couple years. So we're talking about this being a progression, right? We actually combined, from our smaller attendance centers, we combined a second grade classroom that had single digits on each one of them. And it ended up being like I'd have to go back and look, but it was like 12 or 13 kids combined. And so we were busing students from one small center across 15 miles to another small center to have one teacher do that. And then we also took that other teacher who was the other second grade teacher, whatever, they were doing online only. So we had offered an online only grade or class as well. So we reallocated our staff to meet the needs of the kids we have. And then we also did it with third grade. And then those we did that for a couple years because those students, One year we transported them to this center. Next year they were transported to this center for third grade. So, you're already merging classes of these attendance centers. And that was done for a couple years.
Looking forward at the numbers, we were getting to a point where we would be combining up to 4 classrooms like that.
You're talking about almost being a K, like doing attendance centers, which we looked at as well. So, hey, well, let's just make this one the K4, the pre-K through 4 attendance center. Let's make this one the 5 through 8 attendance center. And we looked at that, and we talked with the communities about that. We talked with the board about that. There wasn't really a willingness to do that either. What you saw was that communities were posturing to essentially preserve their community schools. Yeah. And why wouldn't they, right? I mean, that's very fair, and that's very natural and a normal reaction. And so when we provided certain alternatives throughout the process, they were rejected. I mean, they were not well accepted.
It was divisive. There's not another way to say it. It was divisive. And I'm not sure there's a way to have these conversations that are hard and avoid that. Community schools mean a lot to their community. Yeah. There's a lot of passion behind it. And so it's going to be divisive.
Join us again in part 2, where Dr. Olson and Ms. Workman discuss the outcome of their decision to improve equity in their district by closing a learning center experiencing declining enrollment, how they handled district communication, and the importance of a healthy board-superintendent relationship. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you'd like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube Music. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to leave us a voicemail via the link in the description or send us a voicemail at communications@iasb.com. Thanks.